Welcome to Hercule Mystery, mes amis, to a mystery where every reflection hides a secret. You're listening to The Mirror in the Graveyard, a tale of death, deception, and the haunting power of truth. Imagine an ancient estate shrouded in mist, a mirror taken from a graveyard, and a single scream echoing through the night. Was it an accident, or something far more sinister? As Hercule Poirot steps into Greystone Hall, he will discover that the most dangerous reflections are not found in glass, but in the human heart. Tell us, where are you listening from tonight? Safe by the fire, or somewhere where a mirror stands too close behind you? Let's begin. It was on an evening soaked in autumn mist that the tragedy occurred at Greystone Hall. The countryside lay silent under a pale moon, the great estate stretching like a forgotten kingdom beyond the wrought iron gates. Inside the manor, laughter floated from the drawing room, brittle, charming, and slightly forced, as though each guest were acting a part. The occasion was the annual dinner hosted by Lady Miranda Selburne, widow, socialite, and collector of peculiar things. Among her curiosities was a recent addition: a mirror salvaged from the ruins of Jude's Cemetery, known locally as the Mirror in the Graveyard. The story went that the mirror had once stood over a mausoleum door and was said to reflect not the living, but the dead. Of course, such tales amused her guests. Champagne flowed, conversation shimmered. Among the assembled company were Sir Julian Mordaunt, Lady Miranda's cousin and executor of her late husband's estate; Dr. Alaric Penfold, a distinguished psychologist; Mrs. Clarissa Vale, a poet of questionable morals; and young Philip Dane, an artist whose portraits were rumoured to capture more than mere likeness. And then there was Miss Evelyn Hart, Lady Miranda's personal secretary, quiet, efficient, and always present, just at the edge of things. The evening progressed with the ease of wealth and civility until the power failed. For several seconds, the hall was plunged into darkness. There was a stifled gasp, the clink of a dropped glass, a nervous laugh cut short. Then the light returned, and Lady Miranda was found slumped against the mirror. Her face, pale as marble, stared blankly at the reflection before her. The mirror, that cursed thing, was shattered, a jagged fissure cutting through her image. On the carpet below, a single drop of crimson trickled down from her wrist. She was dead. The guests froze. No one moved. The silence in that instant was like the pause before a scream. Dr. Penfold hurried forward, his hand trembling as he felt for a pulse. "Gone," he whispered. "She's gone." His gaze lifted to the mirror. She must have fallen, the glass cut her terrible accident. But Sir Julian's face darkened. Accident. Miranda never went near that wretched thing. She was terrified of it. And then, from the far end of the room, came Evelyn Hart's quiet, trembling voice. Someone was standing behind her, in the reflection. "I saw it." The police were summoned from Market Brixham within the hour. Questions swirled like the fog outside, but no clear answers came. The only clue, if it could be called that, was a single line scrawled in the condensation of the broken glass. "The mirror remembers." 2 days later, a car of understated elegance rolled up the gravel path to Greystone Hall. From it emerged a small, impeccably dressed man with a bowler hat, a silk scarf, and a cane held just so. His moustaches were as precise as the gleam in his eye. "Hercule Poirot," he announced softly to the butler, who opened the door. "I come, mon ami, to restore order, for there is too much disorder in this house." "N'est-ce pas?" Poirot stood in the doorway of the great hall, his gaze sweeping across the room like a searchlight. The remnants of that dreadful evening lingered still. The overturned glass near the hearth, a faint brown stain on the carpet, and the covered mirror in its gilt frame, now shrouded by a black cloth, as though in mourning. Lady Miranda's death had cast a peculiar shadow over the house, and even the servants moved with subdued dread, whispering of curses and restless spirits. Poirot's lips curved faintly. Superstition, he thought, was often the refuge of guilty minds. Sir Julian Mordaunt received him stiffly, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a man of 50, lean and impeccably dressed, but the tension in his jaw betrayed sleepless nights. "Inspector Graves has left us with little clarity," he said. "An accident, perhaps, but no one who knew Miranda would call it that. She was far too careful, too proud." Poirot inclined his head, noting the way Sir Julian's eyes darted toward the mirror before averting themselves. "You speak of her pride, monsieur. Yet pride, like the mirror, can reflect strange things. You were close to Lady Miranda?" "She was my cousin and my responsibility, in a sense. Her late husband left her the estate, but the finances were strained. I did what I could." His voice was clipped. "If you will allow me, I'll assemble the household for you. You will wish to speak with them, no doubt." As Sir Julian departed, Poirot approached the covered mirror. He lifted a corner of the cloth, revealing a jagged wound of fractured glass. The line of the break seemed deliberate, too precise, as though struck at its center. Beneath the frame, something glittered faintly, a shard with a smudge of reddish-brown. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Blood, yes, but faint. The wound on Lady Miranda's wrist, he recalled from the report, had been shallow. She had bled little, and yet she had died instantly. Poirot turned as footsteps echoed behind him. Miss Evelyn Hart entered, her face pale, her manner subdued. She carried a tray of tea, though her hands trembled slightly. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "I was with her just before the lights went out." Lady Miranda seemed anxious, distracted. She kept glancing at the mirror. I offered to draw the curtains over it, but she refused. "You saw something, mademoiselle, did you not?" Poirot asked gently. "You spoke of a reflection." She hesitated, her lips tightening. "Yes. I saw a shape behind her. Not a clear face, but movement. When the light returned, she was on the floor, and the mirror," she swallowed, "it was cracked. But I swear, I saw someone." "Do you think it was one of the guests?" "I don't know. It was too quick. But Lady Miranda had been receiving strange letters. Monsieur, she burned them. But I once saw her weeping afterward. She said they came from someone who knew about the mirror's history." Evelyn's eyes met his. "She told me once that the mirror didn't reflect her, it accused her." Before Poirot could reply, Sir Julian returned with the others. The drawing-room filled with uneasy silence as he introduced them. Dr. Penfold, whose cool professional poise did not quite hide his fascination. Mrs. Clarissa Vale, perfumed, cynical, her laughter brittle, and Philip Dane, the young artist with eyes too observant for comfort. Each greeted Poirot with varying degrees of curiosity and disdain. Poirot observed them all keenly, the flicker of Mrs. Vale's gaze toward the covered mirror, the faint smirk on Dane's lips, the way Dr. Penfold studied Poirot as though analyzing a specimen. "It is not, perhaps, the mirror that is cursed," Poirot said mildly, seating himself, "but those who have looked too long into it." "You don't believe in curses, Monsieur Poirot?" "Ah, madame, I believe in human nature. It is far more terrible." A tense laugh escaped her. "Then you will find plenty to terrify you here." Dr. Penfold leaned forward. "If I may, Monsieur Poirot, the mirror is an object of psychological suggestion. Lady Miranda was a woman of fragile nerves. Fear alone could have stopped her heart." "Fear?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But fear of what, or of whom? You are certain she was alone when the light went out?" "No one was near her," Penfold replied too quickly. "We were all by the fireplace." Poirot nodded, filing away the hesitation before the answer. "You are all certain of your positions, then, at that moment?" A chorus of affirmations followed, too smooth, too rehearsed. Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Bon. Then we shall see what the truth says when it looks into the mirror." Later, as twilight deepened, Poirot walked the terrace alone, his cane tapping softly. The mist clung to the hedges, and from within the house came muffled voices, low, urgent, fearful. He paused, glancing back toward the drawing-room window, where the shape of the mirror loomed under its shroud. "There is something," he murmured, "that does not fit. A lady who fears a mirror, yet refuses to cover it. A death by fear, yet a cut too shallow to kill. And a reflection, that shows what no one will admit to seeing. It is the psychology of guilt, not the work of ghosts." He turned back toward the house, his mind alight. "Tomorrow, we begin again. The truth, she is already there, waiting in the glass." The next morning dawned with a veil of fog, a pale and eerie light seeping through the high windows of Greystone Hall. The air inside the manor was thick with unease. Poirot took his breakfast alone in the small morning room overlooking the gardens, where the frost clung to the glass panes in delicate feathers. His cup of chocolate steamed gently beside a neatly folded napkin. Never once did he allow disorder, even in mourning. The housekeeper, Mrs. Baines, brought him the tray with trembling hands, murmuring that none of the household had slept. Poirot only nodded, his gaze drifting to the frost patterns on the window, tracing them with his eyes as though they might form a clue. He had spent the night in thought, his mind arranging and rearranging the fragments of the case as carefully as one might place chess pieces. The broken mirror, the single drop of blood, the reflection Evelyn Hart swore she saw each detail demanded precision, not passion. He had learned long ago that passion clouded the little grey cells. Yet there was something about this case that unsettled even him, something elusive and almost theatrical in its construction. A crime staged with care, but to what end? By mid-morning, the household assembled again at his request. The fog had thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Poirot observed them from his chair beside the hearth. Sir Julian with his hands clasped tightly, Dr. Penfold watchful behind his spectacles, Clarissa Vale with the cigarette poised elegantly between her fingers, Philip Dane leaning languidly against the mantel, and Evelyn Hart seated apart, pale and still. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his tone calm but cutting through the heavy silence. "We are all agreed, are we not, that Lady Miranda's death was unusual? There are those who whisper of a curse, those who speak of the mirror's vengeance. Bah, superstitions they are, the refuge of the lazy mind. But I do not accuse anyone of laziness, none. I accuse only of fear. And fear, I think, walks among us still." Clarissa exhaled smoke in a thin silver thread. "You think one of us killed her, Monsieur Poirot?" "I think," he replied softly, "that someone here knows more than they have said. I think that among you there is one who looked into that mirror and saw not a reflection, but an opportunity." There was a rustle, a shift of movement. Poirot noted it. Sir Julian's glance toward Philip Dane. The artist's subtle smile in response. The air crackled with quiet hostility. Poirot pretended not to notice. "Tell me, Mr. Dane," he said, turning suddenly. "You were painting Lady Miranda's portrait, were you not?" Dane's smile did not falter. "I was. She commissioned it last month. It was to hang in that very room, beside the mirror." "Ah, beside the mirror. Then you must have spent much time in its company." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Did it ever reflect something you did not expect?" Dane laughed softly. "If you mean ghosts, no, Monsieur Poirot. I deal in the living, not the dead. May we? But sometimes the living wear masks, more frightening than any ghost," Poirot said. "Your portrait, where is it now?" "In the studio at the far end of the West Wing," Dane replied. "I hadn't yet finished it." Poirot nodded. "I should like to see it later." He turned to Dr. Penfold. "And you, Doctor, Lady Miranda consulted you, did she not?" Penfold hesitated, only a fraction too long. "Occasionally. She suffered from insomnia, mild anxiety. Nothing serious." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Miss Hart tells me she received letters that distressed her greatly. Were these the fantasies of a nervous woman or something more substantial? I wouldn't know, the doctor replied, though his fingers tapped nervously against his knee. She never mentioned them. Poirot sat back, folding his hands. It is curious, then, that everyone knew of these letters but you, the man who treated her nerves. Curious, indeed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Evelyn Hart rose abruptly. Monsieur Poirot, if you wish, I can show you her study. That's where she kept her correspondence before destroying it. Perhaps there's something left. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, mademoiselle. Lead the way. The study was a narrow room lined with shelves of books and peculiar trinkets. A faint scent of lavender lingered, mingled with dust and the sharp tang of ink. On the writing desk lay a small silver letter opener, a half-empty bottle of perfume, and a pile of charred fragments, letters burned to the edge but not consumed. Poirot lifted one delicately with tweezers. The paper bore only a few surviving words. You cannot hide what you did at Jude's. Poirot's expression sharpened. So, Jude's again, the graveyard from which the mirror was taken. Something happened there. Something Lady Miranda wished to forget. He glanced at Evelyn. Who would know of it? She hesitated. Sir Julian, perhaps. He arranged the sale of the land years ago. But I've also heard whispers, rumors that someone else visited that graveyard before the mirror was brought here. Someone from among the guests. Poirot replaced the fragment carefully. Then it is there, in the graves and the past, that we must look for the truth. But remember this, Mademoiselle's secrets buried do not remain so forever. They wait, patient as the dead, for the moment to rise. As they stepped back into the corridor, the wind moaned through the chimney, and somewhere in the house a door slammed like a gunshot. Evelyn flinched. Poirot merely smiled faintly, murmuring to himself, Yes, the house remembers, and soon, so shall we. Poirot lingered in the dim corridor after Evelyn's departure, his gaze fixed upon the closed door of Lady Miranda's study. The scent of burnt paper still clung to his senses, a faint whisper of something hidden and desperate. He adjusted his hat slightly, his mind whirring with delicate precision. The mention of Jude's graveyard, the strange letters, and that mirror, the three pieces, formed the edges of a puzzle whose center remained deliberately obscured. He descended the main staircase with measured steps, his patent shoes gleaming even in the gloom. The air felt heavy, charged with a nervous energy that clung to the tapestries and portraits like invisible dust. In the hall, he found Sir Julian staring into the cold hearth, a glass of brandy untouched at his elbow. The man looked older than he had the day before, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, he murmured, his voice subdued. Miss Hart tells me you've been examining Miranda's letters. I hope they provided something useful. Indeed, Poirot replied quietly. They spoke of secrets, of an incident at Jude's. I find that very suggestive, n'est-ce pas? Sir Julian's face tightened. A woman like Miranda. She enjoyed drama. You mustn't take everything literally. Non, I take nothing literally. I take it logically, Poirot said, his tone delicate but firm. Tell me, mon ami, what was the true nature of your cousin's visit to Jude's before the mirror was acquired? There was a flicker of panic before Sir Julian mastered himself. I hardly recall. The land belonged to our family once. When it was sold, a few relics were offered to us. Miranda insisted on having that wretched mirror, said it fascinated her. Poirot studied him closely. Fascination can be born of guilt as easily as of beauty. Did she ever speak of anyone connected to that place? Never. Sir Julian drained the brandy and set the glass down with a thud. You're chasing phantoms, Poirot. The woman died of fear, as Penfold says. There's no murderer here. Perhaps not a murderer, but certainly, how shall I say, an architect of fear. Poirot's gaze sharpened. One does not die of terror without cause. Someone here wished her to remember something she had long forgotten, and now the mirror remembers in her place. Before Sir Julian could answer, footsteps approached. Dr. Penfold entered briskly, adjusting his gloves. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with clinical courtesy, "the coroner's report has arrived. Cause of death, heart failure induced by shock. The wound was superficial, as you noted." Poirot inclined his head. "Then we are left with a paradox, Docteur. How did a woman in fair health die of fright when nothing tangible threatened her?" "Psychological collapse," Penfold said shortly. "She was of nervous temperament. People like her are their own worst enemies." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, psychology again. You deal in shadows of the mind, I in the clarity of logic. But perhaps our paths shall meet before this affair is over." Penfold's eyes narrowed, but he merely bowed and withdrew. Poirot watched him go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Sir Julian. "One question more, monsieur. Did Lady Miranda have enemies?" "None that I know of," came the tired reply. "Only admirers and a few people jealous of her fortune, perhaps." Poirot nodded slowly, filing away the response. Admirers, jealousy, pride. Always, it is the same trio that leads to tragedy. "I thank you, Sir Julian. I shall now take the air." Outside, the fog had thinned to a ghostly shimmer. Poirot walked the path toward the west wing, where Philip Dane's studio lay. The door stood slightly ajar, and a faint scent of turpentine drifted out. Inside, canvases leaned against the walls, portraits of faces too vivid to be comfortable. And there, on the easel, stood Lady Miranda's likeness. She stared out of the frame with an almost living gaze. Poirot approached, transfixed. The background was the graveyard, Jude's unmistakably, with its crooked crosses and weathered stones. Behind her shoulder, the faint outline of the mirror gleamed like an open wound. Dane stepped from the shadows, his shirt sleeves rolled, a smear of paint on his hand. "I tried to paint what she feared most. She told me once the dead watched her through the glass." Poirot's voice was low. "She told you that?" "She hinted at it," Dane said, lighting a cigarette. "Said she'd done something she couldn't undo. I thought she was merely poetic until she started locking her bedroom door at night." Poirot turned back to the painting. "You are a clever man, Monsieur Dane. You paint truth disguised as art. But perhaps you see too much, eh?" Dane's smile was thin. "Artists see what others deny. Even you, I think." Poirot straightened his cuffs. "Perhaps. But I, monsieur, also see what men try to hide." He let his gaze linger on a small object half buried beneath a cloth near the easel, a metal frame, tarnished and cracked. A missing fragment of glass lay beside it, identical in color to the mirror in the hall. "Curious," Poirot murmured, bending slightly. "You repair mirrors in your studio?" Dane's cigarette trembled. "It's nothing scraps from the movers when they brought the thing in." "I meant to throw it away." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Oui, I am sure you did." He left the studio in silence, stepping back into the cold mist, his mind quietly aflame. The threads were tightening, a broken mirror in two places, a portrait of guilt, a whisper of something buried at Jude's, and somewhere among these polished faces, the reflection of a murderer waiting to be unmasked. Poirot returned to his room as twilight seeped once more through the long corridors of Greystone Hall. He closed the door softly behind him, then stood motionless, listening. The manor was breathing again, that low hum of whispers and hesitant footsteps one hears only in houses where a crime has recently disturbed the rhythm of life. Each sound felt deliberate, each pause expectant. Poirot smiled faintly. Fear had become the unseen guest at Greystone. He crossed to the window, glancing toward the west wing where the artist's studio lay shrouded in fog. The memory of that broken mirror fragment gleamed behind his eyes. Dane's reaction had been too quick, too controlled. And yet, Poirot did not dismiss him entirely. An artist's soul was capable of intensity, but not always of murder. There was something theatrical in Dane's manner, but theatre alone does not draw blood. A knock interrupted his thoughts. When he opened the door, Evelyn Hart stood there, clutching a folded piece of paper. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "I found this in the waste bin of Lady Miranda's study. I think she wrote it the day before she died." Poirot accepted it with delicate fingers. The note was brief, written in a hurried scrawl. "He threatens to expose it. I will not be blackmailed again. The mirror will be my proof." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. She expected confrontation. She prepared for it. He looked at Evelyn. And yet she told no one. Why, I wonder? Evelyn's eyes darted nervously toward the hall. Lady Miranda kept secrets from everyone, even from Sir Julian, especially him. Poirot folded the note carefully. "You fear something, mademoiselle." Her lips trembled. "Yes," she said simply, "because whoever frightened her is still here." When she had gone, Poirot stood very still, his gaze on the closed door. Blackmail. It was the invisible thread weaving every mystery into coherence. He tucked the note into his pocket and descended once more to the great hall. The storm outside had thickened, rain lashed the windows in relentless rhythm, and the fire hissed as though alive. In the drawing room, the others had gathered. Philip Dane lounged in an armchair, cigarette in hand. Clarissa Vale sat by the fire, her eyes glinting like a cat's. Sir Julian poured himself another drink, his hands unsteady. Dr. Penfold stood apart, gazing into the darkened garden. Poirot's entrance silenced them all. "You return from your studio, monsieur?" Poirot asked Dane pleasantly. Dane shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd join the others. Seems we're all haunted tonight." "Indeed," Poirot agreed softly. "By guilt, perhaps, rather than ghosts." I gave a brittle laugh. "We are all guilty of something, Monsieur Poirot. Some of us of envy, some of betrayal, some of worse. But murder?" She tilted her head. "That seems too vulgar for this company." Poirot smiled, his eyes bright. "And yet, madame, vulgarity often hides behind refinement. I have seen it many times." He let his gaze drift across them. "Lady Miranda received letters of threat. She feared exposure. A secret, it seems, bound her to at least one among you. The silence that followed was suffocating. A log cracked in the fire. Doctor," Penfold turned, his voice sharp. "You have no proof of that?" "No," Poirot replied smoothly, "but I have psychology. You see, doctor, guilt speaks not in words but in reactions. When I said exposure, you moved. When I said threat, you turned away. Very telling, is it not?" Penfold's face paled. "You're twisting simple gestures into accusation." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly. "But the truth," she wriggles, she shifts, and then she shows her face. Sir Julian slammed his glass down. "Enough. My cousin is dead, and you toy with us like a stage magician. Either name your culprit, or leave us in peace." Poirot regarded him with sudden stillness. "You are impatient, Sir Julian. It is not impatience of the innocent, I think, but of the cornered. You were the one who brought the mirror from Jude's. Tell me what was found with it." The man's eyes flickered. Old trinkets, rusted frames, nothing of value. "Ah, but perhaps something of danger?" Poirot's tone was gentle, almost sympathetic. "A secret buried with a name, perhaps. Something Lady Miranda wished never to see again. And when the mirror came to her home, she saw it reflected not in glass, but in conscience." Sir Julian's hand trembled on the edge of the mantel. "You don't know what you're talking about." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice a whisper. "Then let me ask one last question. The night she died, when the lights went out, where were you, monsieur?" Julian's breath hitched. I was by the window." "You can ask them all." "Yes," Poirot said softly, "and I shall. But you see, In darkness, the truth does not hide. It waits, and the light it always returns. Lightning flashed, illuminating every face in that uneasy room. For one instant, Poirot saw what he had been waiting for. Fear, yes, but not in Sir Julian's eyes. It was in Clarissa Vale's. A flicker of terror, swiftly masked. He bowed slightly, concealing his satisfaction. "Merci, mes amis," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, I believe, the mirror will speak." And as he turned to leave, the storm roared louder, shaking the windows as though the house itself longed to confess. The night stretched long after Poirot's declaration. The storm raged as though it sought to tear the roof from Greystone Hall, howling through the chimneys with a voice that seemed almost human. None of the guests slept. Poirot knew it. He could sense the restless movement of feet across the floors, the opening and closing of doors. Fear had made the house sleepless, fear and the knowledge that he was close. He sat at his desk, the note from Lady Miranda before him, reading and rereading the words. He threatens to expose it. Who was he? He turned the question in his mind, tasting it as if it were a flavor to be analyzed. Julian's guilt was of inheritance, of something financial perhaps, but not murder. Dane, the artist, hid something behind his charm. Penfold was defensive, a man used to power over the minds of others. And Clarissa, her eyes had betrayed her. Fear, unmistakable and sudden. Poirot rose and crossed to the window, the storm's reflection flashing like white fire across his face. It was then he noticed movement below, a figure slipping across the lawn toward the old chapel beyond the garden. He caught only a glimpse, a pale shawl whipped by wind. Without hesitation, he took his hat and coat, descending quietly through the hall. The door groaned open, and the storm struck him full force, rain slicing against his cheeks. The figure ahead moved swiftly toward the chapel ruins, what had once been part of Jude's, its stones reclaimed to build the estate. Poirot followed, his shoes sinking into wet earth, the beam of his lantern slicing through mist. When he reached the chapel arch, the figure froze. Clarissa Vale, her face was pale as porcelain, her gown soaked, her gloved hands clutching something close to her chest. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, "you frightened me." "I might say the same, madame," he replied, his voice even against the storm's fury. "A woman who wanders to a graveyard at midnight, either she seeks peace, or she hides from truth. Which is it, I wonder?" Clarissa's lips trembled. "I couldn't sleep. The mirror, it haunts me. I keep seeing it when I close my eyes." "Then why come here, where the mirror was born?" Poirot stepped closer, the lantern's light falling upon her hands. "And what is that you carry?" She hesitated, then uncurled her fingers. A locket, dull with age, rested in her palm. "I found it yesterday, behind the frame of that cursed mirror. I wanted to return it, to put it back where it came from. I thought it might stop whatever this is." Poirot took the locket carefully, opening it. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young woman, Lady Miranda, unmistakably, but beside her, a man's face had been scratched away violently, leaving only gouged metal. Beneath the portrait, a single initial remained engraved. A. "Madame?" Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "For Alaric, perhaps, Dr. Penfold?" Clarissa's eyes widened in shock. "You think?" "I think," Poirot said quietly, "that Lady Miranda's anxiety was not of ghosts, but of men. The good doctor, perhaps, knew her before she became Lady Selburne. A past hidden, a lover betrayed, and later a blackmailer discovered." Clarissa shook her head, tears mixing with rain. "She was ashamed. I heard her once, speaking to him in the garden. She begged him to stop, said she'd pay anything. But he only laughed. I didn't tell anyone because I thought she could handle it. I never dreamed she'd—" Her voice broke. Poirot put a hand on her arm. "You did not kill her, madame, but you knew the danger and said nothing. Guilt, it leaves its mark, does it not?" A flash of lightning illuminated the chapel walls, and for an instant Poirot saw a shadow move behind them. Someone had followed. He turned sharply, but the figure vanished into the storm. Only the echo of hurried footsteps lingered. "Come, madame," Poirot said firmly. "We must go back. It is no longer safe." They returned to the hall, drenched and breathless. Poirot left Clarissa in the care of the housekeeper, then went directly to the library. He spread the locket, the burned letters, and the mirror shard on the table, his mind assembling the pieces with methodical grace. Lady Miranda's letters, the blackmail, the mirror as proof. The reflection Evelyn claimed she saw someone behind Miranda when she died. Someone tall, standing close enough to strike or frighten, and the wound too shallow to kill, but enough to spill a drop of blood. No, Miranda had not been struck. She had been terrified. She had recognized someone in the darkness. The door creaked. Poirot did not turn. "You walk softly, Dr. Penfold," he said calmly. "One might think you are accustomed to approaching unannounced." Penfold froze in the doorway. His face was pale, eyes dark and burning. "You're mistaken, Monsieur Poirot. I came to check on Miss Vale. She's unwell." Poirot turned then, slowly. "She will recover. But I fear, doctor, that you may not." Penfold's composure cracked. "You and have no proof." "None," Poirot said softly, "but I have reason. You loved her once, did you not? Lady Miranda, before her marriage, before her title. You sought revenge when she cast you aside, and when she bought the mirror from Jude's, you saw your chance. The mirror you used in your experiments, perhaps. Hypnosis. Suggestion, your art of fear. You frightened her, doctor, until her heart obeyed your will and stopped. Murder not by knife, but by terror." Penfold's breath came ragged. "You can't prove that." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Ah, but the mirror will. Tomorrow, when all are gathered, we shall let it reflect once more, and perhaps then the truth will stare back." The doctor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. When he left, Poirot remained seated, the storm finally beginning to fade. Outside, the first hint of dawn brushed the horizon like a whispered promise. Poirot smiled faintly to himself, murmuring, "Yes, the mirror remembers. And so, too, will justice." The morning after the storm broke quiet and grey, a heavy stillness settling over Greystone Hall as if the house itself awaited judgment. Poirot descended the grand staircase, his cane tapping lightly against the polished wood, his mind already rehearsing the steps of revelation that would soon follow. The air smelled faintly of rain and smoke, and the servants moved like shadows, hushed, unwilling to meet his gaze. Something in the night had shifted. The tension had ripened into fear. In the drawing room, Sir Julian sat rigidly by the fire, eyes bloodshot, his untouched cup of tea trembling slightly on its saucer. Clarissa Vale had not emerged from her room, but her sobbing could be heard faintly through the corridor when Poirot passed earlier. Evelyn Hart, pale and sleepless, waited by the window, her gaze fixed on the covered mirror that had once dominated the room. The cloth hung heavy and dark over the shattered glass, as though it hid a wound that refused to heal. Poirot entered with calm precision, his presence silencing even the rustle of the curtains. "Ah," he said softly, "the morning after the storm, always the time when truth begins to dry its tears and speak." His eyes lingered on each face. "We shall have our little gathering soon, yes. But first, one more piece must fall into place." Dr. Penfold entered then, composed but hollow-eyed, carrying a small leather case. "You asked to see me, Monsieur Poirot." "Oui, docteur. You have been most helpful, though perhaps not intentionally." Poirot's tone was almost affectionate. "I have been thinking much of Lady Miranda's heart, how delicate, how easily influenced. You of all people would know that, would you not?" Penfold's hands tightened on the case. "I was her physician. My only aim was to help her. To help her sleep, perhaps? With your methods of suggestion? Poirot moved closer, his gaze sharp and bright. I have read your paper on induced shock, quite remarkable. A fragile mind can be made to believe anything, even that a mirror holds the dead. The doctor's voice turned cold. You twist my work into evil. Non, mon ami, Poirot said softly. It was you who twisted it. You used the mirror, her fear, her guilt, whatever it was that bound her to Jude's, to control her, to frighten her until her heart, poor organ, betrayed her. Penfold stepped back, his jaw tightening. And where is your proof? In whispers? In superstition? In human behavior, Poirot replied. Always. It reveals the truth. You returned to the chapel last night after following us. Did you think I did not see your shadow among the ruins? You came for what Clarissa found, the locket, but alas, it is no longer yours to hide. He produced it from his pocket, letting it dangle by its chain. The faint light caught the scratched face within. Your image was here once, Doctor. She destroyed it. A woman, scorned, perhaps, but not fearful until you made her so. The doctor's face drained of color. For a moment, silence pulsed between them, broken only by the fire's crackle. Evelyn turned, her eyes wide. You, Dr. Penfold, were the man she feared? He said nothing. Then, slowly, he sank into the nearest chair, the case slipping from his grasp. She ruined me, he said hoarsely. After her marriage, she denied everything, called me delusional, dangerous. She took my research, published it under her husband's name. When I threatened to expose her, she laughed. I wanted her to know fear, just once, to look into that mirror and see her own deceit staring back. And you succeeded too well. I didn't mean to kill her, Penfold whispered. When the lights went out, I whispered from the shadows, just a few words. He is waiting for you, Miranda. She turned, saw her reflection, saw herself alone, and screamed. The mirror cracked. I thought she had only fainted. Poirot regarded him for a long moment, then said quietly, It was not your whisper that killed her, but your cruelty. The body recovers from pain, but never from terror. At that moment, the door opened. Sir Julian stood there, face pale, eyes fierce. You vile coward, he said, advancing a step. You drove her to madness. Poirot raised a hand sharply. No violence, monsieur. Justice does not need it. The doctor rose unsteadily, his gaze fixed on the mirror. You will never understand, he murmured. She was the liar, the thief. I only showed her the truth. He reached for the cloth and pulled it away with a sudden motion. The broken glass gleamed dully, its surface fractured into 100 accusing eyes. For a single second, everyone froze. Then, in the reflection, they saw him, Penfold, standing not as he was, but distorted, monstrous, the rain-streaked window behind him like a grave. His breath caught, and a strangled sound escaped him. Poirot stepped forward, but before he could speak, Penfold swayed, clutched his chest, and collapsed. Evelyn screamed. Sir Julian leapt forward, kneeling beside him, but the doctor's head lolled to one side. Dead. His heart, it seemed, had followed the same cruel path as his victims. Poirot exhaled slowly. The mirror claims another, he said softly, almost to himself. But this time, not by curse, by conscience. The room fell into stunned silence. Outside, the storm had passed completely, and the first fragile sunlight touched the cracked mirror, scattering reflections across the walls like shards of truth. Poirot turned toward it, his eyes weary but bright. Ah, Madame Miranda, he murmured. You may rest now. The mirror remembers, and so, too, does justice. The silence that followed Dr. Penfold's collapse was a living thing, heavy, trembling, suffocating. For several moments, no one moved. The fire crackled faintly, a log shifting and sending up a small hiss of sparks, as if mocking the drama that had unfolded in its glow. Poirot stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the doctor's still form. He did not rush to confirm what he already knew. Instead, he observed every gesture, every face, every unspoken fear in the room. Sir Julian's hands shook as he drew away from the body, his lips moving soundlessly. Evelyn's sobs were quiet but raw, her composure unraveling at last. Clarissa Vale, however, remained utterly still. Her gaze was fixed not on the dead man, but on the mirror. It was Poirot who broke the silence. So, it ends. The man who frightened another to death has himself died of fright. There is irony, yes, but also balance. Nature. She likes symmetry. His tone was soft, reflective. Yet beneath it, a glint of unease remained. Something about the scene disturbed him, not the death itself, but its neatness. Too neat, too convenient. He turned toward Clarissa. "Madame, you look pale. The truth has shaken you, perhaps." Clarissa's voice came slow and faint. "It's over, then. Truly over?" "Almost," Poirot murmured. "You see, there are still things I do not understand. The mirror it broke in such a way, perfectly down the middle. The wound on Lady Miranda's wrist, light, deliberate, not desperate. And now, another death, just as sudden. There is a pattern, mes amis. And I do not think it was written by the hand of chance." Evelyn looked up, her eyes wide with dread. But if Penfold wasn't, then who? Poirot raised a hand gently. "Patience, mademoiselle. The truth, she is shy. She must be coaxed out, like a cat." He turned to Sir Julian. "You, monsieur, have inherited everything, yes? The estate, the collections, the fortune." Julian's eyes flashed. "You're not suggesting—" "I suggest nothing," Poirot said smoothly. "I only observe that grief can be clouded by practicality. And you have been very practical since your cousin's death, have you not? Managing affairs, silencing servants, keeping certain things hidden." Julian's expression hardened. "I was protecting her reputation. She was my family." "Ah," Poirot said, stepping closer. "Then perhaps you can explain why Lady Miranda's bank account shows several large withdrawals in the weeks before her death. Money that cannot be accounted for." Julian stiffened. "That's nonsense. How would you even—" Poirot smiled faintly. "I inquired. A man who claims no secrets must not fear the truth. N'est-ce pas?" His eyes gleamed with sudden sharpness. "You were paying someone, were you not, to keep quiet about what happened at Jude's?" Julian's breath caught. "You know nothing about that." "Then enlighten me," Poirot said quietly. "Because Lady Miranda's final note, 'I will not be blackmailed again,' suggests a history, and I think you know precisely what that history is." The silence stretched until Julian's composure cracked. "It wasn't her secret alone," he said hoarsely. "It was mine too. Years ago, before Miranda married, she came to me for help. She'd done something unforgivable. There was a man, a quarrel, an accident. She buried it literally and I helped her. We thought it forgotten, but someone found out. Someone began writing, threatening to expose us both. And that someone," Poirot murmured, "was Penfold." Julian nodded miserably. "He wanted money. I paid him, but Miranda wanted proof, something that would expose his deceit. That's why she brought the mirror here. She believed she could use it against him, twist his own fears. But it backfired. He frightened her instead." Poirot listened in silence, then said softly, "You both concealed a crime to hide shame, and yet it is another crime that has found you." He turned to the others, his gaze falling on Clarissa. "But there remains one last curiosity, madame. You said last night that you found the locket behind the mirror. Yet the mirror had hung undisturbed since the night of Lady Miranda's death. How, then, did you find what could only have fallen afterward?" Clarissa froze. The color drained from her face. Perhaps it was lying on the floor. Non, Poirot said gently, almost kindly. You are a poor liar, madame. You placed it there, did you not? After hearing what Evelyn told me that the mirror came from Jude's. You wanted to implicate Penfold. Perhaps you feared I would look too closely elsewhere. Clarissa's voice trembled. You don't know what he was. He ruined her life, destroyed her mind. Ah, but you ruined his, Poirot interrupted softly. You followed him last night, did you not? You meant to frighten him as he had frightened her. You whispered to him in the dark, and when he turned, he saw his reflection, his own guilt. It was his heart that failed. Yes, but you lit the fuse. Clarissa's breath shuddered out of her. He deserved it. Perhaps, Poirot said, but justice is not revenge. It is balance. He stepped back, letting his words sink into the still air. Lady Miranda feared the mirror because it reflected truth. You, madame, have done the same. You looked and saw your own sin, and it destroyed you both. Clarissa sank into a chair, covering her face, the weight of confession pressing her shoulders down. Poirot turned to the mirror once more, its fractured surface catching the weak light like broken diamonds. Ah, he murmured. In the end, the mirror remembers everything, but it does not forgive. Outside, the first distant toll of the church bell marked the hour. The storm had passed, but within Greystone Hall, the echoes of what it had revealed would linger, reflections that would never fade. The afternoon light crept through the rain-streaked windows, fragile and cold, painting Greystone Hall in pallid shades of grey. The fire had burned low, leaving the air thick with the scent of ash. Clarissa Vale sat hunched in the armchair, her hands clasped tight as if holding herself together. The strain of her confession still clung to her like frost. Her once coy poise was gone, replaced by something hollow. Poirot stood near the hearth, the reflection of the broken mirror shimmering faintly behind him. Evelyn hovered by the door, uncertain whether to stay or flee, while Sir Julian paced with a desperate, restless energy, like a man circling his own guilt. Poirot's voice broke the silence. It is curious, is it not, how truth multiplies itself like reflections in glass, one crime giving birth to another, each a distorted echo of the last. We began with the death of Lady Miranda. An accident, a terror, perhaps, but what we find, mes amis, is a labyrinth of guilt. His gaze swept slowly across them, his tone calm but heavy with purpose. And yet, I am not satisfied. Julian stopped pacing. Not satisfied? You have your confession. Clarissa's admitted her part. Penfold's dead. What more could there be? Poirot turned his head slightly. Ah, but confession is not always the same as truth. It can be guilt's disguise. We, the guilty, speak to unburden themselves, but sometimes they speak to conceal another. Clarissa looked up sharply, eyes wide. I told you everything I know. Poirot inclined his head politely. So you believe. Yet your story has a hole, madame, a small one. But it gapes wide enough for a lie to crawl through. Evelyn's breath hitched. A lie? What lie? Poirot turned toward her gently. You were in the drawing room that night, mademoiselle. You saw Lady Miranda fall. You saw the mirror crack. You told me you glimpsed someone behind her, a reflection, a shadow. Yes, but you never told us who you thought it was. Evelyn blinked, confusion flitting across her face. I didn't. No, I couldn't be sure. The lights went out. The lights, Poirot interrupted softly, were cut deliberately. That I know now. And when the power returned, only Lady Miranda was dead. Yet the cord near the fuse box bore a print, small, feminine. He looked at her steadily. Not Clarissa's. Hers are slender but elegant. Yours, mademoiselle, are small. Evelyn paled, taking a step back. You can't think I... Ah, but I do not think. I observe, Poirot said, his tone a quiet scalpel. You were devoted to Lady Miranda, Yes, but devotion can twist into something else, resentment, perhaps, when affection is not returned. Tell me, mademoiselle, why did you cry the night before her death? The maid heard you in your room. Evelyn's voice trembled. She told me she was dismissing me, said I was becoming too attached. That I embarrassed her before the guests. Julian exhaled sharply, disbelief shadowing his face. Good God, Poirot continued mercilessly. She humiliated you, perhaps, threatened to send you away. You had seen her letters, her secrets, her blackmailer. You feared losing your place, your security. So when the storm came, and she stood before that mirror, you saw your chance to frighten her, to make her beg your forgiveness. You cut the light, you whispered her name, and when she turned, she saw you not her reflection, but her own sin staring back in your eyes. No, I never meant to. None, of course not, Poirot said softly. You meant only to scare her, to make her feel as small as you had felt. But fear, it is a dangerous servant. You saw her collapse. You thought she was dead, and in panic, you made it appear an accident. Then, you let the doctor's guilt swallow your own. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She treated me like a shadow, she whispered. I did everything for her, everything, and she looked through me. That night, I wanted her to see me, just once. Poirot's eyes softened with a melancholy wisdom. And now she will see you forever in the reflection of justice. He gestured gently towards Sir Julian, who stood stunned and silent. You, monsieur, must call the authorities. It is over. Julian moved as if in a daze. Clarissa sat rigid, her gaze fixed on Evelyn, with something like pity. The young woman sobbed quietly, clutching the folds of her dress as if she could vanish within them. Poirot turned toward the shattered mirror, its broken face glittering faintly in the dim light. Ah, he murmured, almost to himself. The mirror. She has shown every soul what they truly are. Lady Miranda saw her past. The doctor saw his cruelty. Clarissa saw vengeance. And you, mademoiselle, you saw yourself. And it broke you. A long silence followed. Somewhere deep in the hall, a clock chimed softly, marking the hour that would end the nightmare. Poirot drew his coat around him and walked toward the door. His steps were slow, deliberate, echoing faintly against the marble floor. Before leaving, he looked back once more at the room, the guests, the guilt, the mirror that had witnessed it all. It is finished, he said quietly. But remember this, mes amis. Truth is not found in what is seen, it lives in what is reflected. Then he was gone, the door closing gently behind him, leaving only the broken mirror to shimmer faintly in the dying light, holding within its fractured surface the last secrets of Greystone Hall. Outside, the fog was lifting, curling away from the garden like a ghost finally at peace. Poirot paused on the gravel path, his breath clouding faintly in the chill air. The morning was still young, but the weight of what had transpired within Greystone Hall already hung like the last note of a funeral hymn. He drew out his handkerchief, brushed a speck of dust from his immaculate cuff, and allowed himself a sigh. Felt no. Triumph was too coarse a word. It was something quieter, sadder. Another human heart laid bare. Another mirror cracked. Behind him, the house loomed grey stone against grey sky, its windows glinting weakly. He heard footsteps crunch on the path and turned to see Inspector Graves approaching, his hat pulled low, his notebook already out. "Monsieur Poirot," the inspector greeted, his tone brisk. "I got your message." "So it's the girl then? The secretary?" Poirot nodded once. "Oui, mon ami. It is as I wrote. Mademoiselle Hart has confessed, though not entirely in words. One sees the truth in the eyes before one hears it in the mouth." Graves frowned. "It's a strange one, I'll grant you. A death by fear, another by shock, and now a confession without malice. Never seen the like." Poirot smiled faintly. though his eyes were grave. It is the nature of such tragedies, mon cher. The heart, it is more fragile than any glass. A word, a look, a humiliation. They cut deeper than a knife. He glanced toward the distant chapel ruins, their outline stark against the mist. And yet, we pretend that cruelty leaves no mark. Ah, but it leaves a mark always. Graves took a slow drag from his cigarette, nodding. Still, you were right about the girl. Wouldn't have believed it myself. Thought her too quiet. Quiet people, Poirot murmured, often speak the loudest when pushed beyond their limits. He began to walk again, his steps deliberate. Do you know, mon ami, I had the feeling from the first that the mirror was not the villain. It was a witness. A cruel, honest witness that reflected what no one wished to see. Lady Miranda. She saw guilt. Penfold saw his corruption. Clarissa saw her deceit. And the young Evelyn, she saw invisibility. To be unseen is the most unbearable reflection of all. Graves exhaled, a plume of smoke drifting into the cold air. You talk like a poet, Poirot. Not sure the courts will appreciate it. Poirot chuckled softly. Perhaps not. But justice, true justice, does not always wear the robes of the law. Sometimes it arrives in silence, with a tear, with regret. He looked back toward the manor, his gaze lingering on an upper window where Evelyn had stood not long before, her face pale against the glass. She will not hang. The judge will see pity in her story. I shall make certain of it. The inspector gave him a curious look. You pity her? Poirot's expression softened, his voice quiet but certain. I pity all who look too deeply into their own reflection. They reached the gates of Greystone Hall, where Poirot's hired motorcar waited, its engine idling softly. The driver straightened at his approach. Poirot paused, turning once more toward the manor. A light breeze carried the faint chime of the church bell from the village below. It tolled the hour, slow and solemn, as if marking the end of something vast and invisible. Inside, life would continue. The servants would whisper. Sir Julian would retreat into solitude. Clarissa would pack her gowns and vanish back to London society, pretending she had never believed in ghosts. The police would gather their evidence, their reports, their statements, and Evelyn Hart, poor broken Evelyn, would sit in her small room until they came for her. Staring at the reflection of herself in the mirror, Poirot had ordered covered once more. He climbed into the car, folding his gloves neatly in his lap. The inspector lingered at the door. I'll never understand it, Graves muttered. All that madness over a mirror. Poirot smiled faintly. None, my friend. Not a mirror. A truth. The car began to move, wheels crunching over gravel. It is a dangerous thing. Truth. We spend our lives hiding from it, adorning it, convincing ourselves it is something prettier. But when it looks back at us, unmasked, then it can destroy. Silence for a while. The countryside unfolded in shades of silver and green, the storm's remnants scattered across the fields. Poirot leaned his head back, watching the landscape through half-closed eyes. He thought of Lady Miranda's proud face, of Penfold's arrogance, of Clarissa's trembling confession, and of the young woman whose longing had turned to despair. Each had gazed into that mirror, and each had seen what they could not bear to face. When the car crested the hill, Greystone Hall shrank into the distance, its grey walls fading into mist. Poirot breathed deeply, a faint melancholy touching his immaculate features. Ah, Hastings, he murmured under his breath. You would have said it was poetic nonsense, this affair. But the psychology, it is everything. People die not of the knife or the poison, but of what they keep within. And that, mon ami, is the true tragedy of the heart. The car disappeared down the winding road, the sound of its engine fading into the stillness. Behind, the fog closed once more around the ancient estate, and within it, The broken mirror stood silent and blind. Yet when the next light touched its fractured surface, it would still gleam faintly, catching just enough reflection to remember. For glass, like truth, never truly forgets.